What's up, Detroit? Shigeto here. I'm hosting a brand new program called The New Music Show, sharing my must-have cuts to the freshest sounds coming out of the city. The New Music Show, Saturday nights at 8 p.m. on 1019 WDET.
It's The Metro on 1019 WDET. I'm Tia Graham.
And I'm Nick Austin. The Metro, your source for daily news, arts, and culture, bringing you the latest in Metro Detroit through stories and conversations. Tia, they tell me today is Valentine's Day.
That's what they say.
I'm going to believe it because they just keep telling me. So what are we going to do on the show in honor of it? As technology advances, so does the way we build and maintain relationships. But what can we learn about creating strong connections in the age of social media and online dating? We'll speak with the director of a research lab focused on these questions to learn more about her research.
And, bringing up Valentine's Day, which is today, what are your plans for Valentine's Day? Do you have any rituals or special traditions with your loved ones or even your platonic friendships? You can give us a call. Let us know. 313-577-1019. It is 313-577-1019. Share your Valentine's Day plans with us on the Metro. Now, today is Valentine's Day, of course, and that could mean a few things for you. It may mean dinner and a movie, or maybe it's a romantic stroll along the Detroit Riverwalk. No matter what you decide, Valentine's Day has been constructed for romantic partners. But it's not just Valentine's Day. Much of our lives in America today are centered around finding and keeping romantic partners. But what about the folks who spend so much time with their friends or platonic friendships? What does friendship mean to us in our lives? Rhaina Cohen is a producer and editor for NPR's Embedded podcast and the author of the new book, The Other Significant Others, Reimagining Life with Friendship at the Center. Rhaina Cohen, thank you so much for joining us on the Metro.
So happy to be here on Valentine's Day.
Yes, I'm wearing my pink sweater as well, so I am festive right now.
Great.
So when we think about the book and of course, the term friendship, what do you define friendship as in the book?
I mean, friendship now is such a capacious term that I think it can mean something that's not very close for a lot of people. But I think friendship is fundamentally a relationship that is chosen, and it is mutually chosen. So two or more people are deciding to be bound together in a way that you don't get to choose your siblings and your parents and so on. And it's rooted around trying to support each other, having an affinity for one another. And it really can run the gamut from people that you see every few months but have a lot of affection for, to people who, you see every day and you're in touch with about the intricacies and the mundane aspects of your life. So there's a lot of flexibility within friendship, but I think always there is the sense of choice and affection.
And going through the book and just going through some of the themes, there was a friend in the book that you call M, who you met after moving into a new city, and you describe how that friendship expanded your ideas on what friendship could be. Now, how did that work for you, and what were some of the things that you learned about friendship?
So Em and I, when we met in D.C. where I live, discovered that we lived a 5-minute walk from each other. So it became really easy for us to be integrated into each other's lives. I could just walk to her house on the way to the Metro and during my morning commute, and I would stop by for 20 minutes to have oatmeal and chat about our lives. And we ended up making each other plus ones to parties, to including at our offices. Just the people who knew us individually ended up knowing us both almost as a unit. And that really went beyond what I was told friendship could be, that, friends are really supposed to be the supporting cast and not a main character in your life. And was certainly a main character in my life, and made me wonder, why is there not really a term to talk about a friendship of this nature, which felt to the two of us much more like it was approaching partnership than even what best friend, if that's sort of peak friendship, that best friend wasn't really cutting it.
And I love that so much. I have a similar relationship with my close friend, and I often think that there's not a term for what we have because it's further than best friends. And then I often think about some of my guy friends, my male friends, and I think about who are they going to talk to about their relationship or whatever it may be? And in particular, American men have very few friends. Nick Austin, we were talking about this a little bit earlier about men and friendships and companionship with men. And you talked a little bit about, just like, men just kind of ask for what they want.
Well, I'll say there have been a lot of studies on male friendship. And I'm sure you know also, Rhaina, how it's declining right now in America. And there are some struggles men are taking as a result of it. So much is heaped on their romantic partners, maybe their wives, to fulfill all these roles. With American men saying they have few friends. Have you done any looking at that? And do you have any understanding on why that is right now?
It is definitely the case that the decline that all Americans are experiencing in friendship or have experienced over the last few decades has really hit men hardest. And, for one thing, I guess think about how boys are socialized to not be particularly emotionally open, and that when they are allowed to cry or be emotional in some way, it would be in the context of a romantic relationship. I mean, one person who I follow in the book is a straight man who grew up in a conservative religious environment, and he remains in a religious environment. He's a youth pastor, and he grew up like not knowing that you could be close to other men, and in fact, it was as he became very close to somebody he now considers as close as a brother, he had questions around his sexuality because he was like, well, is it possible that I could want to hug my friend? Does it mean that I'm gay if I miss my friend because I haven't seen him in so long? And, if the answer was yes, that would be perfect. Certainly my book would be perfectly fine, but it's a testament to how little latitude a lot of straight men feel to show any kind of closeness to other men. And what, ended up happening in this situation where this guy, Nick, talked to his friend Art about maybe I'm gay because I miss you and I want to hug you. His friend was like, that's just emotional intimacy. That's just, wanting to caring about somebody. And the problem was that Nick, the straight man, had never experienced that outside the context of a romantic relationship. So I think his experience is quite, representative of what a lot of men feel, and they, don't know how to get close to other men, might be afraid of being perceived as gay and have some kind of homophobia that they may or may not recognize, and then end up doing what one author has called emotional gold digging, where they rely on their female partners to provide their emotional needs rather than turning to other, male friends in their lives.
Yeah, Rhaina, I'm glad you brought up that story because, first of all, I think that's true, and it's not fair to your romantic partner, but also in that story, as I recall from the book, there were actual ramifications that this male in a conservative environment felt when people saw him or he was trying to date while having this relationship with someone else. Can you give us a little bit more insight in what you found there and what the actual ramifications were for them making that decision?
Yeah, it's quite a devastating story in a lot of ways. So to sort of step back a moment, these two men, Nick and Art, who are now around 30, they met in college, a Christian college, studying to be youth pastors. And they both belong to conservative Christian denominations. And one thing that Art realized over time is that he's gay. And the way that he decided to reconcile his reading of the Bible and his sexuality was to become celibate. And his friend Nick decided that he was going to live life alongside Art so that Art didn't have to be alone because he was celibate. And so these men have lived together, and the evangelical internet caught wind of this, and eventually the denomination of Art, this gay youth pastor, and people could not seem to wrap their minds around the idea that you could have two men who are committed to each other, especially when you have this kind of cross-sexuality relationship, and that it wasn't, as one of these blogs said, a backdoor to a homosexual marriage. And Art ended up having to resign from his job, and he no longer works as a youth pastor. He had some terrible things said about him. Nick also had people contacting his church trying to get him reprimanded. There's just it's sort of hard for people to believe that men especially can be so close, or at least, if one person in the pair is straight and that there's not something sexual at play. And in this sort of conservative environment where, any kind of queerness is not okay, they faced real, concrete ramifications that were, had to do with their jobs, and is also extremely emotionally painful to have had to go through this.
Yeah, we're chatting with Rhaina Cohen, a producer and editor for NPR's Embedded podcast and the author of the new book, The Other Significant Others, Reimagining Life with Friendship at the Center. And we're just going to continue the conversation. And if you could, just briefly touch on the historical factors that play into relationship forming habits. You talked a little bit about that in the book, the history of it, whether it was exclusion, you couldn't get married or whatnot based on your color or whatever it may have been. Can you get into that a little bit?
Yeah, I mean, there's tons of history here, which I think helps us understand how odd our current moment is, where friendship is this relationship that is kind of peripheral. There's so much emphasis on nuclear family and on marriage. And, marriage used to be a much more pragmatic institution. So people didn't expect to get their, necessarily even love within marriage. It was, like you're trading money and resources and then, forging family ties. And now there is so many expectations of marriage that it, I kind of joke that it's a little bit like a man spreader on a subway. Like marriage is taking up so much space that there's no room for friendship left. But, to what you're alluding to in terms of people who have been excluded from marriage historically, I mean, those have been the groups that have done so much innovative kind of work on where you find connection. So whether it is enslaved Black people who were not allowed to get married and had to form, what are called like fictive kin, like they form families outside the law, and also, not necessarily across blood ties, or queer people who have formed chosen families because they were often rejected by their families of origin. I mean, there's a sort of vast precedent for people really turning to their friends and not just biological or marital ties, as we, I guess the mainstream now thinks that that's kind of the way to run your life.
I don't know, Rhaina, when your knees get aching on you after years of sports, sometimes you need a little extra space on the subway. I apologize in advance. As we're speaking to Rhaina Cohen, producer and editor of NPR's Embedded podcast. Rhaina, you're also, as we discuss this book, The Other Significant Others, Reimagining Life with Friendship at the Center. We've been highlighting a lot of the couples and relationships, unique relationships you've spoken about. Was there any through line that you noticed through all of these stories or takeaways that you gleaned in speaking with folks that you thought was something that you were a little surprised about that people can learn from it?
I think there's an astonishing degree of vulnerability and communication skills that these people have in these sorts of friendships. So, just to make sure that that I'm clear about the kind of friendships that people have here, these are really like life partnerships. These are friends who own homes together. Some are raising kids together. Some are, they take care of each other when one has cancer or growing old. And they have no roadmap for how to do that. I mean, there's a roadmap and there's legal infrastructure for marriage. But because people in these friendships don't have those templates, they really have to negotiate everything themselves. So, like the two men that I was talking about, Nick and Art, they had some really rocky stretches because there were periods where like Nick would not pay much attention to the friendship because he had a romantic relationship, and that was sort of the normal thing that you're supposed to do. You don't pay as much attention to a friendship. And so what I have seen again and again is, these pairs of people, or sometimes like trios, really trying to, having to articulate and negotiate what the relationship is going to look like for them without the kind of security of relying on a template that might make things easier or make conversation less awkward or difficult. And it's, it takes a lot of courage to do that.
So when we are thinking about, of course, picking a person to be a platonic friend with or a life partner with, I often have this conversation about my longtime friend, where we have conversations just like the ones that are presented in your book, where we just talk about different ways that we can stay connected to one another in a very significant way. So when we think about people out there looking for friends, what should they do more of when they're looking for people? And many people want friends, but they don't know where to start. So where should they start?
Mm-hmm. Well, I think the where to start with friends is, you like go to places where people are doing things that maybe you're interested in too. I last year or so started doing swing dance, and I was immediately thrust into this community where I have gotten to know all sorts of people and in different different degrees. I would say what I hear from people is less the question of like, how do you meet someone, but more, how do you move from like an acquaintance or to a friend, or how do you move from a friend to like a very close friend? It's this sort of escalation that people really struggle with. And I think it goes back to your previous question about like, what is distinct about the platonic partners who I write about. And it's like their willingness to have kind of uncomfortable, unusual conversations about, what do we want to be to each other? And I think being forward sometimes about like, I'm really, I tell people like I have a friend crush on you, I just find that sometimes being really explicit, people are, you're able to figure out like ways to be closer a lot faster, and people usually respond well to that. And I think one maybe concrete thing is to think about like, what are the activities that you might do for a romantic partner? Like, pick someone up from the airport or bring them as a plus one to a party, and think about like, could you have a friend in that role, or could you serve that role for a friend? And I think that can create an opportunity to move from maybe a more, surface level friendship to one where you feel more committed to one another.
So, Rhaina, I love, once again, everything that we've been talking about on this segment so far, but I think about that as well with my close friend and just having these conversations. And I always say that I am actively in love with her. She's my best friend, and that's what I choose to do every single day when I am in this relationship. But we're talking about friendship. We're talking about significant others. And I just want to have you throw a question out to our callers, 313-577-1019, about friendship. What would you ask the people out there about friendship, or something that they would want to share about friendship?
I'm always just interested in what people feel like others don't understand about their friendship, or what would be the thing if people got about their, friendship life that would make things better for them, because I think, a lot is misunderstood.
Rhaina Cohen is a producer and editor for NPR's Embedded podcast and the author of the new book, The Other Significant Others, Reimagining Life with Friendship at the Center. Thank you so much for joining us on the Metro and sharing this conversation and your book.
Thank you for having me on and sharing about your lives, too.
Coming up on the Metro as we continue, what are your plans for Valentine's Day, whether they be with friends or with a significant other? Do you have a ritual that you like to do on this day? Maybe going out to dinner or a movie so you don't have to talk to that other partner. Or do you have something more unique maybe you can share with us that we can all learn? Give us a call, 313-577-1019. Even if you don't do anything on Valentine's Day, you can tell us why as well. We might be able to work you into the conversation and hear from you as we continue on the Metro here on 1019 WDET.
Welcome back to the Metro right here on 1019 WDET FM. It is a happy sunny Valentine's Day with a high of 38 degrees today. Tomorrow, though, there'll be rain and snow showers before 9 a.m. It's going to continue raining during the day until 4 p.m. The high for Thursday is 43 degrees, and we could see wind gusts up to 39 miles per hour, so see your loved one now.
That's right. A little chilly out there as you're listening to the Metro, your source for daily news, arts, and culture, bringing you the latest in Metro Detroit through stories and conversations, but we'll go beyond as well, especially with stories that fit the theme. And with love being in the air right now, we want to turn to StoryCorps to discuss a story that celebrates it, specifically Miranda Dushak and Mima Davis. They were the first lesbian couple to get married in Missouri. They're now divorced, but Mima and Miranda are still work partners, still raising a child together, and are still very much in love. Here's their story.
We met at work, right, at our day job. And then we decided to farm together, fell in love, got married at a spiritual ceremony where we jumped the broom because we couldn't legally be married. And then the second wedding was in 2014, right, to be legally married. Do you remember this when we had August? Do you remember how I pushed August out?
Okay. What do you mean, do I remember that?
Yeah, but they didn't know how to fill out the birth certificate
I do
paper.
remember that.
So I was making a fact sheet to leave at the nurse's station about how to register.
It's okay. It's okay. You can have some tears.
I just felt like we were total freaks, man.
We weren't freaks. We were just firsts.
We were just first. And it was really embarrassing for me that we fought so hard to get married and then we got divorced.
But, that was part of the rights that we fought for.
I know. I would say that to people.
And that's all part of the package, right? You get to be married and then you get to be divorced.
Right. I was like, just like straight people. I can get divorced. I can get divorced. It didn't necessarily pan out the way we thought it would be.
But we're still in it. We're still farming partners.
We're raising a beautiful son. These are gorgeous flowers sitting in front of us. And Mima Davis, I'm going to say right now, I still really love you and care about you.
Of course, I love you and care about you too. That was never in question for me. Both really in our hearts and souls and deep down, totally committed to each other. And that's why we work through all the real stuff. And I see that as the win.
You look like a flower.
That was Miranda Dushak and Mima Davis, the first lesbian couple to get married in Missouri. I love.
Are you tearing up on me right now, Tia?
I love, Nick.
Well, that's very nice, but there's a lot of electronic equipment here, so.
Well, it's good.
I'm
Can't afford to get it fixed, so but I just want to bring up this Valentine's Day thing that's happening.
I'll get the tissues. You go ahead and do that.
Yeah, thank you, Nick. Love for Jamboree. Love stories from the LGBTQ community returns to the Planet and Theater. It's a series of heartfelt and fun vlogs created by interviewing LGBTQ people about their experiences with love. Tonight's Valentine's Day show at 8 p.m. and it runs through February 24th. You can find tickets and more information at planet@com.
As we focus on this Valentine's Day here on the Metro, your source for daily news, arts, and culture, the latest in Metro Detroit in stories and conversations. That focus also has to turn to social media. We find and make relationships in the online space. In fact, with the rise of technology, the way that we interact and form relationships, perhaps no change has been as stark as in the world of social media and dating apps. That's why this Valentine's Day, I spoke with an expert who's done a lot in this area. Professor Stephanie Tong is the director of the Social Media and Relational Technologies Labs at Wayne State University. Their program researches the way technology affects how people make decisions about their relationships. This includes how people use text messages, dating apps, dating sites, and technology generally to maintain and even distance themselves in their relationships. To ask Professor Tong what she learned about how we use technology to maintain our relationship.
So there's a lot of kind of push and pull, right, with existing relationships. A lot of times we can use technology to stay close together and kind of develop that sense of closeness. But technology is also great when you need a sense of autonomy, when you need to have a little bit of distance from your partner. You can put that text message away and maybe answer it another time. So it's really good for kind of navigating those tensions in ways that allow for really healthy kinds of communication, both together and apart. And I think we saw a lot of that during COVID, right? When everyone really relied on technology very heavily to stay in touch because we lost kind of that in-person component. And so I think kind of coming back to that has been a big asset, but also a challenge with how we kind of use technology.
Some old school folks would think relationships are all about touch. It's an important part of it, maintaining closeness. Whereas when we transfer to digital devices, you mentioned text messages, online spaces, that can maybe provide a sense of distance. So is there any risk or concern that relationships can grow further apart as we rely more on text messages and online communication as opposed to that in-person connection, or has it been an adequate way of replacing that?
Yeah, so that's a really good question. And I'm still in the old school camp. I still believe that in-person connection, that physical touch is a really important part of relationships and developing intimacy. I don't ever think that's going to be replaced, even though I study technology and I'm a big fan.
I'm a big fan too, so you got another one. It's cool.
Right? Yeah, but I think you're right. Technology can offer a sense of replacement when that's not available. And it can also be a way for us to really be even more competent and adaptable in our communication. So, If you've ever spent time composing just the right text message to say I love you, or an apology message, or anything that kind of helps build those relational connections. And I like to think of them as capillaries, like you're exercising, right, the closeness in your relationship. Technology can be a real advantage for that. You get a chance to kind of take a break and really think through what you want to say and how you want to say it. Whereas, if you're in person and in the heat of the moment, that can be really difficult to do.
Well, based on, again, the research, the surveys, and all that you've done there with the Smart Lab, do you have any recommendations for people who are trying to figure out that balance between in-person versus technological communication, text messages and things? What tips would you have people who are trying to navigate that balance?
Yeah, so that's a really good one, because technology can be, I think, a source of comfort, but can also be a source of conflict, right? So I think the best thing is to start with is talking to your partner, thinking through some of the things that are kind of foundational to your relationship, right? And if there are problems in your relationship, to really address that with open and frank discussion in as collected a way as you can do it, because avoiding that, right, and just using technology as a form of avoidance to just simply not talk about certain topics or kind of talk around them can be a really quick way to damage your relationship. So I think that open, honest communication, no matter what channel you do it in, some people can do that more openly through mediated channels. They like the distance that technology can provide, but other people really need to have that discussion in person. So I think just talking to your partner and really thinking through how you communicate as much as what you say is a really important starting place.
Yeah, something that we always hear, right? Communication is key. As again, I'm speaking with Professor Stephanie Tong of Wayne State University. And now, if you don't do that communication, Dr. Tong, you might end up single and looking for love on Valentine's Day. But that's okay, because you've also done some research in how people work to find love using digital devices and online. Can you tell us a little bit more about the work you've done there and what you found?
Yeah. And you know what? Hey, if you're single on Valentine's Day, good for you.
Yeah, that's right. You're a little cheaper.
Right? Exactly. But if you are concerned and you are thinking like, I might want to reach out and start some romantic connections. I think one of the default places that a lot of us look to these days is, mobile and online dating apps, Tinder, Bumble, Grindr. These are platforms that a lot of people kind of think to first as one of the go-to spots to find romantic connections. And I think there's some push-pull there. I think when they first came out on the scene, 10, 12 years ago, it was the really important place to be, and it was very novel and very exciting, and it still can be. But I think we're also starting to see a little bit of what people call dating app fatigue, which is simply that people are getting really tired with kind of the overall need to look for and continually update their profile and keep up with the swipes. That can be a lot. And the added pressure on Valentine's Day is certainly true.
Yeah, I believe that. But one of the other things I think about with these things, so many apps use algorithms as a way of kind of monetizing the system. And I don't know, when I've used apps like that, how much I can trust whether it's working for me or it's working for itself just to get more money from me or more money from my friends and things. Do algorithms play any role in what you've learned in looking at these apps and what you've learned in talking to people about who use them?
Wow. Well, first, Nick, I'm going to say that you're a really savvy app user. Most people don't even consider the algorithm is running in the background and collecting all this information. So first off, I think you're kind of a really savvy user. But the second thing is, we have done a little bit of research looking at that. The thing that's interesting about algorithms, right, is that we don't think about them unless they don't perform well, which is kind of funny, right? I mean, you can think of it with Google search. Google is great, and when it returns all the search results you want, you think it's fantastic. It's only when it returns things that you don't want where you recognize like, oh, this algorithm isn't performing the way I think. And so I think we can kind of migrate that thinking over to algorithms embedded in platforms like Tinder, where boy, I keep getting these matches and they're just not what I'm looking for, and it can cause people to think, is there something wrong with me? Or is this the system? Who's to blame here when we use these technologies?
Do you have any ideas or tips that you've learned just from your work for folks who are out there looking, whether in the online space or not?
Yeah, I mean, I think one thing is to remember kind of who you are as an individual, as a starting place, right? So to be in touch with what you think is important in a relationship, who you are, right? Just as a person before you start looking for a partner.
That was Professor Stephanie Tong, the director of Smart Labs at Wayne State University, where they research the ways technology affects how people make decisions about their relationships. Indeed, during our conversation, she also highlighted how for those looking for a partner and making connections in these spaces, it can feel like a very high-pressure environment. Because of this, Professor Tong also recommends for people to remember to take breaks and to also remember this is for you. This is not for any other people. So don't let those outside pressures get into that communicative space when you are ready to look. This is The Metro on 1019 WDET, your source for daily news, arts, and culture, bringing you the latest in Metro Detroit through stories and conversations, talking about love. When I think of love, Tia, I think of rats. Because there's so many of them, they breed a lot. They must know a little something about love, right? Doesn't that just come together?
You know, in your brain, sure. In your brain, sure, I think of plagues.
Well, I'll tell you, I know Dearborn, there's an issue with rats, but they think they've got a solution to get into it. It seems appropriate on a Valentine's Day to find out more about that solution, and we will do that when we return on The Metro. You're listening to The Metro, our new show connecting Metro Detroiters through stories and conversations about the news, art, and culture affecting the city and our region. I'm Nick Austin, joined by our co-host, Tia Graham, and we're getting into the stories you need to know on Valentine's Day, including rats. Because about 2 years ago, 3 of Michigan's cities ranked among the worst for rat infestations. Detroit, Grand Rapids, and Flint were reported to have some of the highest populations of rats per capita in the country. But those cities don't exist in a vacuum, and one neighboring suburb is trying to do more to rid their area of rats. Metro producer Sam Corey sat down with Renault Arsenault, Dearborn's code enforcement manager, to learn more about what Dearborn is doing to keep rats away.
Renault, tell me, what is this new program Dearborn has to keep rodents and rats away, presumably from people's homes?
Yeah, so it's actually an expansion of the program that we've already had for basically more than 50 years in the city. We have always offered city services for above ground vector control problems. That means if you have a problem on your own property, we have city staff. We have the capabilities of giving you advice and helping to eradicate rats on your own personal property. What we're doing now is we're taking that a step above, and we're also baiting below ground now, and we're hoping to affect the above ground rat population by going below ground to also fight rats below ground. Basically, we're baiting 460 sewers, and we're basically putting, rat rodenticide into the sewers, and we're targeting areas of the city where we're receiving the most amount of complaints. Orkin is going to do some data analysis for us and provide us with kind of heat maps as to where they're seeing the most activity via their bait being eaten the most.
Mm-hmm. Rats are a really big problem in Michigan, definitely in Southeast Michigan. I'm curious what kind of complaints you hear from Dearborn residents specifically as it relates to rats.
Well, anybody who has rats on their property, they call and they want to know, because, again, rats aren't just necessarily a problem for one particular person. They travel, they burrow, and so you could have the cleanest property and have no issues, but if your neighbor has a trash problem, or your neighbor isn't picking up their dog droppings, or your neighbor has a garden that hasn't been kept, you could have rats coming through your property or burrowing on your property. And so we hear those complaints often about, there's rats in my neighborhood, or that dumpster that's behind the fence, which is abutting my residential, isn't cleaned. And so we hear the complaints. Now, we're just acting above and beyond what other cities do in our general area. So we're trying to do everything we can to eliminate them from a city level.
Right, which is interesting, I mean, because there are a lot of rats in this area. A couple of years ago, it was declared that Michigan has 3 of the top rat-infested cities in the country, with Detroit at number 9. I'm curious,
Yeah,
I would just like to get your thoughts. Like, why do you think that is?
Somebody had asked me that question, and I said I didn't want to, speak to what other communities' problems are because, we don't necessarily have the same problems as Detroit, but I know we do share a border. I would just say that, we have very dense population areas, and Detroit does have a above ground vector program. They're one of the other cities in Michigan that does have this city employee program where they do vector services. So Detroit is doing their part. We may be discussing how we can work together with this subterranean program. We've talked about reaching out to their vector team, but I don't want to speak to what other city problems other communities have because I'm not involved in the day-to-day with those.
Sure. No, that makes a lot of sense. One of the things that you mentioned is you're using a sort of a poison to kill the rats. I understand probably a lot of people are happy about this. I do wonder if there's any way that you're trying to rid the city of rats or keep them out without killing them.
Well, we're exploring, and we have one device on shift, and we have another one on order. It's called Burrow RX, and it's a carbon monoxide-based approach instead of a poison-based approach. This actually targets their burrows, and it's a carbon monoxide. Basically, it's almost like it's a device. It kind of looks like a weed whacker a little bit, and you kind of shoot the carbon monoxide into the burrows, and it kills them in a more humane approach, if you want to. I mean, killing is killing, right? But they're taking a little bit more of a non-poisonous way of killing them. So we do have one of those machines, and it kills them within, 5 minutes.
Yeah, but what I'm hearing is there's not another way to do it. There's no way to keep them out without killing them.
No, there's been some long-term studies about other animals that could hunt or prey on rats, but I think those are longer-term solutions. And when people have rats on their property, they don't want to wait a couple of years for a study that may be happening with owls or something like that. They want to know, hey, if I open up my door and there's a rat there, they just want it gone,
Right. People very much do not like rats. I'm also certainly in that category. And my neighbor, I live in Detroit, my neighbor has a bunch of cats coming around because he feeds them. And I think he's successfully kept rats out of his home. Although I still did have a problem with mice and potentially rats and even a gopher get into my crawl space to try to keep warm. Every fall you start hearing the thump, thump, thump in the middle of the night. It drives you a little bit batty. I've used sonic repellent to keep the rodents away from my home. And I think at this point it's worked, but knock on wood. I'm wondering if there are things that you recommend, though, to Dearborn residents to keep away rodents and rats.
Yeah, I would just all the property maintenance stuff that we put out about, keeping your firewood off the ground, keeping your grass cut when it's that season, picking up after your garden, picking up after your animals, the same stuff that we always say to people year after year, but also I would inform our residents to not use the stuff that they're seeing at Home Depot or at Lowe's because we're finding that most rats are immune to that type of poison. And again, we're the ones who are state certified. We'd prefer to provide that service to you and let our experts bait or use the Burrow RX program.
Rhaina Cohen, Code Enforcement Manager for the City of Dearborn. Thank you so much for your time.
That was Sam Corey, producer for The Metro, speaking with Dearborn's Rhaina Cohen about what his city is doing to keep rats out of Dearborn. This is The Metro on 1019 WDET, where I'm Nick Austin, joined by Tia Graham. And Tia, you did mention some events that are happening here for this Valentine's Day, February 14th. One of those is Barkside, Detroit's dog park and bar. Dog Park Bar. Say that 5 times fast. Beer/wine garden also. It's having a doggy date night. That's happening today from 5 to 8 p.m. You can have a Valentine's themed cocktail while your dog enjoys a pup cup. They serving booze to the dogs too?
Yeah.
I don't know. We'll do some more research, but there's also going to be a doggy photo booth so that you can strike a pose with you and your pup. Maybe there'll be some puppy love there too. All of these photos, my gosh.
I'm trying to get into this with you, but I don't know, Nick. You sounding like, I'm forcing this little love for doggies. You like dogs?
Me?
Yeah.
No.
I didn't. I can hear it. But you know what? Shout out to those who do.
Right.
Shout out to those who are going to take their dogs to Barkside and in Detroit to the dog bar, park bar, and have a good time with the doggies.
Yeah.
I mean, I've been to a bar with dogs before.
I see them. They're popping up everywhere in Detroit. Folks love their bars that are dog friendly.
Yeah.
And it's like man's best friend, woman's best friend. You have your cuddly little pup.
Yeah.
Get to get a sip while having your dog out there with you. And of course, the thing that they told me when I was growing up said, Nick, your dog, it's a great way to start talking to the ladies. Ladies see your dog and they go, a man knows I take care of a dog.
It's Valentine's Day. You might as well talk about the dogs getting ladies for you. So if you have your pup, take a walk today. It's nice outside. You might find yourself a Valentine or a potential partner in the near future. You never know, Nick.
Plausible.
You never know.
Plausible.
You never know. We do have a dog park right across from the station as well. You might find your next lover there. Who knows?
Who knows? Or don't. Just go there for the dogs and the booze and have a good time with your favorite pup. You've got that option also. Don't feel like you're trapped into anything on this Valentine's Day. The world is your oyster. Speaking of which, oysters also very popular on Valentine's Day.
It's funny you say oysters because the next story that we're going to be chatting about is water. We're going to be talking about water in the city of Detroit. I thought about oysters, water. Here we go. So that's coming up next on the Metro right here on 101.9 WDET.
This is the Metro on 101.9 WDET, your source for daily news, arts, and culture, bringing you the latest in Metro Detroit through stories and conversations. I'm Nick Austin.
And I am Tia Graham. And just like we said, we're talking about water. Detroit Board of Water Commissioners was founded and created today in 1853. At that time, very few cities had water systems, and Detroit's growing population meant something had to change. Part of Detroit's system was a waterworks park, giving Detroiters a lot more than just water. Detroit Public Television's Anne-Marie Seislin dove into Detroit's water Disneyland on WDET's Curiosity podcast and answered this listener question.
The mysterious waterworks park, just wondering what it was for. Is it functional now? Was it actually a park?
That's Barb Williams. Her question is about Detroit's Waterworks Park, located on East Jefferson, just east of Belle Isle. To find the answer, I talked to Dan Austin. He runs HistoricDetroit.org and works for the Detroit Free Press.
So Waterworks Park started in the 1800s. Very few cities in the United States had waterworks systems. The city waterworks bought some land over on East Jefferson near what is now Cadillac Boulevard, which is where the Waterworks Park still remain.
And for the next 100 years or so, that's where the city's water's been pumped to households throughout Detroit. But what's most interesting about this plant is that it offered so much more than water.
There were 110 acres of green space with swimming pools and picnic areas and playground equipment, and you could take rowboats through these canals, and it was a real leisurely spot, much like Belle Isle was.
And more than that, the park had some serious landmarks, things that became tourist attractions all their own.
You first kind of walked into the park, you would pass through the Hurlbut Gate, which still stands.
Wait a minute, Hurlbut?
Chauncey Hurlbut. Chauncey was a longtime president of the Board of Water Commissioners. He was a grocer, which is how he made his money, but his real love was Waterworks Park. And when he died in 1885, he left his estate to the beautification of Waterworks Park, and part of that was to build this massive Hurlbut Memorial Gate.
Which leads to the park's next big attraction.
As you walk down the drive, you would come across a clock that was made entirely out of plants, and it was powered off of water pressure because it was Waterworks Park.
And then there was the tower, the biggest draw of all, literally.
It was a giant tower, 124 feet in the air. It looked kind of like a minaret. It doubled as an observation tower. It was pretty much the tallest thing in town.
The tower operated as the world's prettiest pressure equalizer until 1895, which is around the time technology rendered it obsolete. However, it still remained an iconic symbol of Detroit until it was brought down around 1945, after the Buildings and Safety Engineering Department determined it was unsafe and too expensive to repair. But how did it get so run down? 2 words: national security.
During the First and Second World War, Detroit was the arsenal of democracy. We were certainly a major target for attack from our enemies. So over fear that someone might, go into the park and poison the water supply, let's say, the park was closed, and over time, people forgot about Waterworks Park.
And there was some public outcry in the early 60s, so a small part of the park was reopened. But after the tower was torn down and the lagoons were filled in, it just wasn't the place it used to be.
One by one, all of these things that drew people to Waterworks Park were kind of taken away. And eventually the park was taken away. It's kind of become another piece of Detroit's forgotten past. And if it weren't for that Hurlbut Memorial Gate, people would be zipping by Jefferson, without any indication that there was ever a park there.
So, Barb, did that answer your question?
Oh, yeah. That's just fascinating. I had no idea of the history, and I appreciate your research.
That was DPTV's Anna Marie Seisling taking us back in time to Detroit's Waterworks Park. She cut it right there, too.
That's right, man. You got to drop it like it's hot. Listen, in DJing, I would remember sometimes, you got like the hot out. You just got like, boom.
Boom.
Gets it. It has that feeling, though, man. Yeah. You can use it right. I'm with it.
I'm here for that as well. You are listening to The Metro on 101.9 WDET.
This is the Metro on 101.9 WDET. As Tia just told you, and I do want to make sure, yesterday was Fat Tuesday. It was Punchki Day. We learned how to properly pronounce Punchki. Yeah. You know what we also did? Ate a lot of Punchkis, and that was made possible courtesy of Yellow Light Coffee and Donuts over on East Jefferson. They just dropped them by. Very kind, because, in order to do radio, you gotta eat,
sugar.
Right? Like
we
orders
need sugar.
of priority.
Sugar.
You see? Sugar.
Sugar. Pizza.
Pizza's good.
Coffee's up there, too.
I'm mainlining it right now.
Exactly. Me, too. But sugar and those Punchkis from yesterday from Yellow Light.
Yeah.
Just absolutely delicious. The poppy seed with the blueberry, the lemon, custard. Yeah. It was just fantastic.
Yeah. So thanks for that. And thanks to you guys also for listening here, not only yesterday, today. We're going to be here all week, like I mentioned, for the news, arts, and culture that are shaping what we do here in Metro Detroit as you are listening to the Metro. A lot of things going on. Happy Valentine's Day to all of you guys. I want you guys to have a good one, whether you're celebrating romantically or not.
And, I think about celebrating and romantic vibes, and I think about music, and I think about In the Groove with Ryan Patrick Hooper.
What's going on, guys?
Are you feeling lovely?
Yeah, I'm finally admitting my crush on you two. Happy Valentine's Day. And today on In the Groove, lots of new music, obviously a lot of lovey-dovey tracks, but the way we're going to do it, I do want to make people cry. So we're going to come right out the gate with Cat Power's cover of Sea of Love, but then we're going to go into No Worries side piece. So it's going to be quite a mix of emotions. Sometimes you got to give something up to commit. Sometimes you got to cry a little bit on the radio. We're going to groove. We're going to move. We're going to flirt. We're going to fall in love today on In the Groove, coming up at noon on WDET.
Going through the wealth of emotions. Get your tissues ready.
Tissues, get your all types of things ready. I don't know what to expect, but I'm expecting something.
That's right. That's the Metro for Wednesday, February 14th. You can listen to your recent episode online at WDET.org and make sure to subscribe to the podcast on your favorite platform.
The show is produced by Sam Corey, David Lyons, and Jack Philbrandt. Our technical director is Nate Bender. Music by by Sam Bobian. Our news director is Jerome Vaughn, and our program director is Adam Fox.
The Metro is a WDET production, a listener-supported service of Wayne State University. If you like what you hear and want to support the Metro, consider becoming a member at wdet.org/donate.
This is WDET-FM, Detroit's NPR station, your connection to news, music, and conversation. I want to say goodbye to Nick.
Bye, Tia.